Okay, awesome. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to join us. My name is Alex. I am working here at Fox Haven, and we're so excited to have you all joining us for Decolonizing Herbalism today. Sorry, also I'm admitting people at the same time. A little bit about Fox Haven. For people who are not aware, our mission is to help deepen the connection between humankind and the natural world. We fulfill our mission by growing fresh herbs using organic and regenerative farm practices and hosting educational events and retreats. We open our doors for you to come and stay in any of our farmhouse rentals. These locations are perfect for private gatherings, celebrations, and enjoying some much needed peace and quiet. To learn more about Fox Haven and what we offer, please visit www.foxhavenfarm.org. And we're really excited today. Just to let you know, you will be getting the recording at the end. But this event has also raised over $600 for our BIPOC scholarship program. So we'll be announcing some things on our Instagram and social media for BIPOC folks. If you are wanting to come to the farm, take classes, or enjoy a retreat or stay in one of our farmhouses, we will have some opportunities for discounts and so on. Now, without further ado, I will go ahead and introduce our host, Qubilah. Why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Thank you so much, Alex. Good evening, everyone. My name is Qubilah Huddleston. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm super excited to be having this conversation with you all tonight. Just a little bit about me. I'm the creator of the Holistic Agenda, which is a wellness platform that was birthed out of a vision of a world in which Black and Brown folks have more inclusive and accessible health and wellness information that's rooted in truth and purpose. My journey to herbalism started because I dealt with some health issues that I felt my doctors at the time weren't really helping me cope with, right? And I didn't really feel connected to what they were trying to prescribe. And so that just led me down this path, and I haven't looked back since. Just some background, I was raised in Charlotte, North Carolina, but I do have roots in the desert out in Reno, Nevada. On my dad's side, my family is pretty deep out there, which I love and is central to my identity. And I just wanted to share a few of my favorite herbs with you all. I love passion flower, I love lemon balm and tulsi or holy basil. And I would actually love if maybe in the chat folks shared what some of their favorite herbs are. I'm always curious to see where there's alignment or folks are working with other herbs I'm not familiar with. And if you're new to herbalism, maybe you can share an herb that you're interested in exploring. And so this is how our conversation is gonna flow. I'm gonna share some definitions so that we're all on the same page. I'm gonna cover some history to talk about how we got here. I'm gonna talk about decolonizing herbalism, so the why and the what and the how. And during that portion, I will highlight some different herbs. And then with our remaining time, I hope that we can just reflect on our conversation as well as ask any questions that we may have. I do also want to say that at different points throughout the presentation, I might talk about things that some people find triggering or sensitive. And so if you need to take a moment for that, please do so. Also, I know it's dinner time, so if you need to step away to eat, have me in earshot distance, by all means, please do that. So before we get started, I did want to ground our conversation in this Sinkofa Principle. This is a principle that I carry with me throughout my life. Some folks may be familiar with this. So this bird is an Andinkra symbol of the Akan people in Ghana, and it translates to go back and fetch it. So I definitely wanted to bring that to our conversation, because I think we have to be able to look at our past and look at lessons learned in order to bring that into the future and like create solutions that are not going to repeat the mistakes of the past. And so I'm inviting everyone to like adopt that mentality for tonight, so that we can have this conversation. So the first definitions I want to talk about are herbalism, systemic racism, and decolonization. We may all be at different stages with our understanding of these. So I definitely just wanted to unite us around a few definitions that we can carry with us throughout the conversation. So starting with herbalism. Herbalism is an ancient practice. It's literally been around since humans have existed. I think the beautiful thing about herbalism is that it doesn't just have like one name or one meaning, right? Some folks may call it folk medicine, plant medicine, ancestral medicine, but no matter what you call it, all people have had this practice as part of their experience. And I wanted to share this description of ancestral medicine from Empress Karen Rose, who's a master herbalist and owner of Sacred Vibes Apothecary. This definition comes from her latest book, The Art and Practice of Spiritual Herbalism, Transform, Heal, and Remember with the Power of Plants and Ancestral Medicine. So she says, plants help us navigate finding harmony by supporting knowledge of the self, which creates agency and power. Plant medicine turns us inward to witness the self, reclaim our ancestors' resilience, and fortify our spirits so we can do the work of healing. And I think that description is perfect for tonight, because oftentimes when we think or talk about herbalism, it's in a matter of like, oh, we're going to heal, like we're going to soothe a sore throat, or we're going to heal some sort of ailment. But I think it goes beyond that. And certainly when we think about the indigenous and Black and other people of color, the roots of herbalism, it's important that we like expand our thinking about it. So with that beautiful definition in mind, we have a problem, right? We have a problem, and our problem is that herbalism is not being practiced equitably in the United States, which really shouldn't be a surprise to folks, right? Herbalism has many inequities, just like many other health and wellness practices in the United States. The Black and Brown communities whose herbal traditions really do serve as the foundation of mainstream herbalism, they do not have the same access to the tools or the resources that white folks who have been able to like dominate the mainstream herbalism scene do. And we know that this inequity in herbalism is contributing to broader health inequities in the US, because if Black and Brown people can't turn to traditional healing methods, while dealing with the healthcare system that is racist, ableist, et cetera, they're not going to be able to like achieve their healthiest selves. So I just want to emphasize that, herbalism is not unique in inequities, but it's certainly worth us discussing. And this isn't happenstance, right? We know that inequities in herbalism, there's a cause, right? A root cause for it. And that is systemic racism, among many other things, but systemic racism has particularly played a role in this. And I found this definition by a sociologist named Joe Fagan, which I think perfectly describes how systemic racism operates, right? So he says it's a complex array of anti-Black practices, the unjustly gained political economic of whites, the continuing economic and other resource inequalities along racial lines, and the white racist ideologies and attitudes created to maintain and rationalize white privilege and power. And I think this definition is important because it emphasizes that it's not just a single act or a single system or any singular factor that makes things racist or leads to inequities, right? It's this layered system that is, leading Black and brown folks and other folks of color to be excluded, barred, et cetera, from the resources that we know they need. And so as we, think about how we might combat that, right? We can look to decolonization, which is an inherently indigenous framework that is about cultural, psychological, and economic freedom for indigenous people. And I do not want to understate the fact that this is an inherently indigenous framework, but I do think that we can use it to apply to like Black folks and other people of color who have and continue to suffer from the legacy of colonialism and systemic racism, because part of decolonization is about undoing, repairing, and restoring the harm that has been done. And more importantly, decolonization offers a path forward towards more equitably and just systems and resource distribution, which is paramount to, addressing inequities in herbalism. So as I said at the beginning, I want to talk about some history. So we're going to get a quick history lesson. So for all you history buffs, you may really love this. So feel free to, engage in the chat because these are the three things that I think play an outsized role in inequities in herbalism, but by no means are they the only things. So we have land theft, cultural genocide, and medical apartheid. So most of us are aware that the United States stole a massive amount of land from indigenous people. And in order to do that, white settlers, they pillaged, they plundered, they murdered indigenous people, they deceived them, they coerced them to get that land. There were also numerous federal laws that propped up indigenous land theft, most notably the Homestead Act, which basically promised white Europeans land if they came over here, and then the Dawes Act, which allowed the United States to break up tribal land. We also know that the United States sanctioned Black land laws. So following the Civil War and Emancipation Proclamation, Black folks owned a lot of land in the South, and that upset, white supremacists. They felt threatened by that. And so they didn't want Black people to establish thriving communities or thriving economies. And so that led to, mass murdering, racial mob terror, lynching, bombing of communities, et cetera. And while all of that was happening, we had cultural genocide occurring as well. And there were, again, numerous federal institutions that made it illegal for indigenous people to powwow or engage in other ceremonies, including traditional medicine, other traditions that were super important to indigenous communities. We know that Black folks, Black Africans were not excluded in being demonized. And so I like to share this fact that, we all learn about the Salem witch trials in school, but what we don't learn is that like the first woman that was accused was an indigenous woman or a Black West Indian woman, depending on which account you read. So this, combination of land theft and then cultural genocide, also we have to layer on medical apartheid. And all of these things were happening simultaneously, right? It's not like one came and then the other and then another. Like these things were co-occurring, which I think speaks to the egregiousness of America's past. But with medical apartheid, people of color's bodies have been exploited upon since, since Europeans basically made contact with us. And particularly Black bodies and Black female bodies have been brutalized in this country, and not just during the enslavement period, but even as recent as 60 years ago. And I wanted to put Fannie Lou Hamer in here, who was a prominent civil rights activist. She was an environmentalist. She was a food justice activist who went into the doctor for what was believed to be a fibroid, but they ultimately performed an involuntary hysterectomy on her, right? And she was one of thousands of Black women who this happened to, as well as Indigenous women, Latinx women, and other women of color. And because of that, a lot of people of color continue to distrust and mistrust the medical system. But I think we have a tension, because while that's happening, the US has also deprived people of color of their, traditional herbal knowledge and traditional ways of healing, and again, have demonized it. So we have this situation where we're not getting our needs met in the Western medical system, and then the ways that we could be healing have been demonized and have honestly been like beaten out of us, as well as like diluted. So all three of these things, I think, really are the underbelly of inequities in herbalism today. So I did want to just like ask us to take a moment to reflect on our shared history, and hold space for the lives and the communities and the traditions that have been lost or forgotten, or, as I said, like literally beaten out of us. And I wanted to, show lavender, because it is another herb that I actually really love too, but I tried to switch it up for this presentation. Lavender is a very calming herb, but it is also used to heal wounds. And I think so many of us, especially for Black and Indigenous and people of color, we do have a lot of scars and wounds that we are trying to tend to. So I just want everyone to maybe like take a minute to pause and reflect right now. Okay. I wanted to bring us back and, just ask that, whether it was a person or a plant or whatever it was that you reflected on, just like carry that with you as we continue this conversation. So now I want to talk about decolonizing herbalism, the why and the what. And this quote from Shanae Bullock, who is a Black and Shinnecock Indigenous woman who is an activist among many other things, put this in her ebook about Indigenous oral history and perspective on plant medicine. And I felt like it beautifully captures why we must decolonize herbalism. History has mystified and erased and co-opted the traditional healing practices of Black and Indigenous folks due to racism, white supremacy, and other oppressive structures. But for Black people and Indigenous folks, healing through herbs is our birthright. And I think all of us, whether we are BIPOC or we consider ourselves white allies, we have an opportunity to ensure that that is realized for BIPOC. We all are going to play a role in this. And so again, I think this quote really encapsulates what decolonizing herbalism is about. And so I think, in the last, I don't know, I feel like every year we have these conversations about, cultural appropriation and commodification of particularly Indigenous culture. And I just wanted to like bring our attention to that tonight. For really millennia, white Americans in particular have appropriated Indigenous traditions, whether it is donning traditional headdresses for costumes at Halloween, or removing the Indigenous spirituality from smudging, right, with sage. America has whitewashed the origins and spirituality of many Indigenous herbs. And what's like really fueling this, right, is illegal and commercial harvesting of these herbs that have been discovered, right, by people. That's creating a situation where indigenous folks are less and less able to connect with these herbs, but also are in a situation where people who these herbs are not sacred to are explaining the importance or significance to indigenous communities as if they don't already know that, right? So I think that, you know, when we think about decolonizing herbalism, we have to reconcile with what it means for white folks to have, you know, capital and disproportionate access to land, and then commercialize these indigenous herbs. And the herb that's on the right is one that I came to know recently because I bought a box of tea at Whole Foods, right? But this plant has been around for millennia. It is called Yaupon holly, and that's spelled Yaupon. And it is one of 2 caffeinated plants that are native to the United States. And it is something that indigenous communities in the southeastern parts of the country would drink regularly. They would drink it during ceremonies, and they would consume so much of it to the point where they would actually throw up. And that is what led Europeans to give it the botanical name Ilex vomitaria, but that's a misnomer because it doesn't actually have emetic properties. It will not make you vomit. It was just that indigenous communities were consuming a lot of it as part of their ceremonies, and that led Europeans to like incorrectly name it. And I see it as I see the potential for it to be, you know, extremely commodified. It's something that grows naturally, but if it becomes trendy like sage, or if we think about like how quinoa had its heyday, or kale or avocado, right? Like all of these different foods that are significant to indigenous communities and communities of color, they become commercialized. The indigeneity of it disappears, and the people who already know and already familiar with all of the benefits, they no longer have as equal access to it. So I actually am interested if folks are aware of any more sacred herbs or healing practices that you've seen commodified. I know sage is one that's like super duper commodified, but just curious if there are others that people are seeing. And I'm looking at the chat.
Palo Santo.
Yes.
Palo Santo, golden milk lattes with turmeric.
Sorrel.
Sweetgrass braids, tobacco, cloves.
Yeah. So there are many.
Yes.
There are many, and some of those I didn't even think about. I remember seeing a sweetgrass basket at IKEA. It's like, okay. So, you know, as we move through thinking about decolonizing herbalism, I think we have to think about where these herbal traditions exist. And, you know, predating European contact, indigenous people and African people, they shared a lot of their knowledge orally. The oral tradition is very significant in communities of color. And so for BIPOC specifically on this call, I think it is incumbent upon us to speak with our elders as they know a lot of the healing knowledge, speak with our family members, whether they're immediate or distant. We have to begin to have those conversations if we really want to reclaim our birthright to healing through plants. And I'll share a story. A few months ago, I was talking with my granny, who's my dad's mom, and I was asking her, I was like, hey, granny, like what herbal traditions did you grow up on? Because like for Black people, right, we love a good ginger ale and chicken soup, right, to deal with our ailments. But I was like, I want to know what the herbs were, you know? And so what she shared with me was that her mother made hog hoof tea. I had never heard of it. And I was like, what is that? And so it's not quite an herb or a plant, but it is like in the folk medicine realm. And I actually like Googled it, and apparently it may be something that was common among Black Texans. And my great grandparents, they were in Texas. And so it was like pretty cool to know that, like, one, that was happening in my family, but two, to know that other Black families, particularly in Texas, may also have relied on that like folk remedy. So that's why I just think it's really important for us to like have these conversations, but also write it down. Like, I think, you know, if you go online and you, or Amazon, and you search books on herbalism, like books written by us, books about our traditions, they're not gonna pop up. And so as important and valuable as the oral tradition is, I do think we have to begin to write this stuff down and document it so that like people that come behind us are able to access this information in perpetuity. And, you know, so much of what people of color do learn about ourselves is often through the lens of white academics. And I just don't think they're the best experts of our lived experiences. And so we have an opportunity to like change that. And that starts with us talking to our own family members. I also think in decolonizing herbalism, we have to acknowledge what I think is the unique way that Black people have been sidelined in the folk medicine space. And I attribute that to, you know, the fact that we were enslaved. And if you think about the stereotypes that pervade about Black people, that we're unintelligent, that we don't have culture, or like all of these other really derogatory stereotypes about us, I think that has bled into the herbalism space, where we have been seen merely as like the laborers, which we know is just not true. And we have to reconcile with this. And so that is what I want to highlight today, right? Like some Black herbal traditions, so that we can begin to like undo that narrative that like Black people weren't herbalists, or, you know, we weren't even like aware that we can heal through plants, because that's just not true. And so to do that, right, I read this paper by this woman named Erin Brooke Hamby, titled "The Roots of Healing: Archaeological and Historical Investigations of African American Herbal Medicine." And I think this was probably the like coolest thing that I read, because it's this like really comprehensive paper about African American or Black American herbal traditions. And what she found by examining like ex-slave narratives, ethnographies, medical records, other documents, she found that Black Americans have relied on at least 108 herbs for medicine, spanning early enslavement until the early 2000s, which is when she published her paper. And I think that's significant, right? Like that was like so cool for me to read that. And I hope that for the, you know, like people on the call, that is an amazing piece of information that you now know about Black herbal traditions. And she examined quite a bit of different things. She looked at which herbs Black folks were using, which parts of the herbs they were using, and how they prepared them. And she even examined like how those things differed regionally as well as over time. And so I actually pulled some of her tables so that you all can see. This is not all of her tables, but this first table just shows sort of all of the different plants that exist within Black herbal traditions. And this table took up 3 pages. As I said, there were 108 herbs, so this does not show all of them, but it shows the plant, right? The common name, the botanical name, how the plant was used, the method of extraction, the part used, and then the time period. And so for your reference, EAB equals early antebellum, LAB equals late antebellum, PB equals postbellum, and then CT equals contemporary. So I'm looking at this list, and when I looked at it, I was like, there are probably like 4 or 5 herbs that I've heard of and I've had experience with, but the rest I have never heard of. I don't have any experience with. But maybe folks who are, on the call, maybe you do have experience with these herbs, but I had never, some of these I had never heard of before. And I did link her paper in the resource slide of this presentation. So when you get it via email, you'll be able to click it and like read her entire paper and see the table entirety. I also pulled this table that showed how Black people, Indigenous folks, and white folks were using different plant species for the same conditions. And I wanted to show this table because I think if we can talk about how, Indigenous people were using herbs, and we talk about the ways white people were using herbs, and like we can also talk about the ways that Black people were using herbs. There's no reason why Black people can't be included in that conversation, especially when you think about how societies were constructed. Like Black and Indigenous people were living together. Obviously with Black people being enslaved, they were interacting with, white people. Like it wasn't this exclusive society where, Indigenous people were practicing what they were practicing. And then, white people were over here practicing what they were practicing. There was actually a lot of cultural exchange happening. And then the last table that I wanted to show is this one, which I find really, really cool. My mom is actually in Ghana right now, and I asked her to bring me back some herbs because like I've just been like digging in, and I'm like, I want to be more connected, right? And so this table shows the ways that African people on the continent were using herbs and how Black people in the US were using herbs during the 20th century. And she found that 13 species of plants were used on both, and that 6 of them were used for the same ailment. So oftentimes I feel that, as Black people and people of color, right, we want to like connect back to our motherlands, like where our ancestors come from, and that information is not always readily available. So I thought this table was really cool because, we can see where the similarities are and where the differences are. So this is really cool. And again, it's stuff like this that I think helps us decolonize herbalism because it helps people reclaim healing methods that may have been lost to them. And so I think a part of decolonizing herbalism is also about acknowledging the ways that people have used herbs as forms of resistance, right? Again, I talked about herbalism sort of being multidimensional and not just about healing through plants, but also, giving spiritual power to particularly oppressed communities. And so I wanted to highlight the ways that enslaved Black women in particular use herbs as a form of resistance. And again, I just do want to say that I'm gonna like mention some things that may be triggering or like hard for people to hear. So, definitely take the time if you need it after hearing what I have to say. But we know that on the plantation that white enslavers were forcing Black women to have children, many children. There are even instances in which they promised Black women their freedom based off of the number of children that they had for them. And they were also forcing enslaved Black women and men to have children as well as much as possible. But Black women were fighting back. They were using like okra and cotton to do so. And so with okra, Black women were using the slime of okra to induce abortions. And similarly, they were also using cotton root in particular to be as a form of contraception. They would chew on the bark to prevent pregnancy, but then they would also decoct the bark in the seeds and drink that to induce abortions. So I think it's all too easy for us to look on the past and be like, there's a lot of hurt and shame, and there absolutely is, but there's also a lot of power. And I think for BIPOC, as we try to, remember and reconnect to plants and our ancestors, we can do that beyond, you know, just trying to like, again, heal an achy stomach with an herb, but we can actually like think about, okay, how is my usage of this herb empowering me to carry on? And if you're familiar with herbs, me saying like passion flower and lemon balm and tulsi, if you know what they're for, right? Like there are a lot of things that work my nerves in this country as a Black woman. And so I have to have something in order to keep going and to you know, do what I'm here to do and fulfill my ancestors' dreams. So I just wanna like encourage people to think about herbalism as a medium and a tool to like amplify resiliency and not only just see it as a way to like heal, you know, a cut or again, a sore throat. So I just wanted to like cover a few herbs that actually have Black African traditions. Foxhaven grows both of these herbs. I've had the privilege of walking in the orchard to see at least the roselle. And I got a bitter melon from Lacey last summer, but I butchered it trying to make a tincture. So I still have some growing to do there. But roselle or hibiscus, it's native to West Africa. It's, you know, packed with antioxidants, and it's really good for like helping our bodies fight off illness. Some folks use it to help manage high blood pressure and bad cholesterol, two things that run really rampant, right, in the Black American community. The edible part of the plant is the red flower that you see. And personally, I've come to know hibiscus in a like culinary perspective, right? Drinking bissap, which is like a Senegalese beverage, similar to sorrel, right? Which is like a Jamaican beverage. And other African countries, actually, they also have a similar beverage. And the beverage is just like this deeply red-hued drink that is made sweet and is often spiced with herbs like clove and ginger. The red color, right, symbolizes strength and spiritual power. And if y'all know anything about Black folks love a good red velvet cake or love a good red punch, right, at, you know, celebrations, cookouts, Juneteenth, right? And that color red, right, for us has come to symbolize the bloodshed by our ancestors and like paying an homage to them. And so while Black Americans may not be, you know, drinking a beverage made from hibiscus necessarily, like we've found a way to maintain that connection, which I think is really cool. And then with bitter melon, it's pretty widespread throughout Asia now, which actually that's how I feel like I first came to like learn about it. But it is an herb that is commonly used to manage type 2 diabetes, but it is also used to treat like high blood pressure or indigestion. The fruit, the leaves, and the seeds all have medicinal benefits. So you can actually like decoct it, you can tincture it, or you can juice it. I actually want to try juicing it just to see what it tastes like, because clearly I can't make a tincture. And then in the Caribbean, which if there are folks from the Caribbean, I would love to like hear more about this, but folks in the Caribbean, they prepare a tea from the leaves and the stems called cerasee, which I've never heard of, but again, it's just another way to you know, use the herb and you know, get the benefits that the bitter melon has. And then the last herb I wanted to talk about quickly is spilanthes. I had like such a weird experience with this herb, but it is really, it's used to like treat toothaches. It's also called the toothache plant. And it is native to both tropical West Africa and South America. And there's an acid in the plant called spilanthol, which is what gives the herb its like tingling and numbing effects. And according to Leah Penniman, the author of Farming While Black, spilanthes is used in West Africa to develop the powers of persuasion and influence. Local leaders are known to use it before important meetings. Now, I did not feel powerful when I used spilanthes. I was given a spilanthes and sage mouthwash I knew about sage, didn't know about spilanthes, but I was like, I should be okay. And I just put it in my mouth and I hated it. I hated it. And so I don't know how I feel about her right now. I think, you know, maybe after a tooth cleaning or something, a teeth cleaning, maybe I'll try it again then. But for now, she's been shelved because I didn't like the feeling. But if you're someone, you know, you struggle with like oral issues, spilanthes could be a good ally for that. So we talked about the why and the what. I want to talk about the how. So in true Qubilah fashion, I had to find like a catchy way for us to like package this information. And I put together this Decolonized Herbalist starter pack. These are like by no means the end all be all, but I think they're important. So, right, talking about the history, learning the history, never divorcing the history, I think is important, and we can't, you know, be ashamed or feel like we can't talk about that because we want to keep the peace. Like that's just not going to be helpful. We need to learn from BIPOC healers, emphasizing like oral and written history. As I said, much of our healing traditions live in the oral tradition. So we need to be talking and seeking relationships with BIPOC healers. I put the Birdman in here. Birdman, he said, put some respect on my name. I feel like we got to put some respect on Indigenous and African rooted herbs. We can't forget, you know, again, we can't forget where they come from, whether it's like the herb originated in those communities or those communities have found ways to use them that have become part of the mainstream herbalism discourse. And then lastly, the one is really a call to white allies. We need y'all to be more accomplices in decolonizing herbalism, right? I think, you know, it's fine to like say you agree with us and you support us, but like think about, you know, resources and other things that could be shared and distributed to decolonize herbalism. And so on this slide, I just included a few other additional steps that, you know, can be done at the micro level. I want to highlight the voluntary land taxes. That's something that Foxhaven is currently paying to the Piscataway Land Trust. I had never heard about land taxes before learning about it through Foxhaven, and I think it's a really cool thing and necessary thing. And a land tax essentially is like paying rent or a mortgage, and it's paid to Indigenous people to recognize our access to stolen Indigenous land. And those are things that we can do as individuals. Like you can literally go to various Indigenous organizations that are facilitating this, and like you could pay a land tax individually if you wanted to. And then for macro steps, right, I think it's one thing for us to do things individually or at a smaller level. It's another for the federal government in particular to right wrongs. And so, you know, there's a land back movement that's happening, right? That's about returning unceded land to Indigenous communities. There's been calls for reparations for Black folks, which I put this the picture of the cover story of the case for reparations from Ta-Nehisi Coates, which like beautifully captures like, we had 250 years of slavery, we had 90 years of Jim Crow, right? Like all the different layers of offenses that have happened, we need reparations. I also think we need new political structures and we need better policies and laws that prohibit further Black and Indigenous displacement. So I included links to several different resources, some of which I covered today, some I didn't. Definitely check them out in your free time. I think these are things that, you know, are central to like building that foundation of like decolonizing herbalism and like becoming a decolonized herbalist. Also want to invite people to stay connected with me. I know this hour flew by, but if you want to keep up with me, I'm at Instagram at The Holistic Agenda. And also I'm building up my email list. So if you want to stay connected with me that way, definitely join. I'll make sure I'll drop the link in the chat once I finish sharing my screen. But if you join my list, right, there's some incentives here. If you join my list, you'll get early bird access to and discounts on some products that I'll be launching soon, starting next month. And then I want to offer the first 3 people who join a free 30-minute stress management herbal consultation. I feel like that's where my strong suit is at the moment. Again, a lot of things work this Black woman's nerve, and I want to help other people not be worked up. And then I also want to offer a free herbal tea sample because they are really special to me, really special blends that I've been working on, and I would love to share that with you all. So thank you for, sticking tight and listening to me just share, more about how we might decolonize herbalism. And, we're going to open up the floor for reactions, questions. I think Alex is going to help us moderate that.
Yes, absolutely. But first, can we get a round of jazz hands for Qubilah, please? Because that was amazing. Thank you so, so much. Good job. Yeah, if anybody has any questions, you can write them down in the chat or feel free to unmute yourself. Happy to facilitate some conversation for the last 10 minutes if we go over. I'll continue to hold space until the end.
Hi, I'm Tiara from Baltimore. I don't have a question, but I just really have a reaction in terms to just saying all the information that was shared today was just really amazing, just about things that I did not know about. I am not an herbalist. I'm more of like a, house plant kind of girl, but like I saw this and I was like, I really want to learn more. And I just think everything you said in terms of just like reclaiming and how, like, especially about Black people being herbalists specifically, I think that's really important, because I think when we hear herbalists, we don't connect like African people to that, which is so crazy to me. So I just want to say this was great. Thank you for all the resources. I will be looking through everything, and I really followed through very well. As someone who's dyslexic, it worked out perfect for me. So thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. I just want to segue from what the last speaker just said. Me being actually from Nigeria, I'm actually African, and learning from my grandparents and things like that, and having the word herbalism having a slightly negative connotation, meaning like a witch doctor, and having that meaning having a negative connotation really I'm realizing is a result of the illusion of white supremacy, like stripping away our culture, stripping away our ways of healing ourselves. So that further makes me more excited to do what I'm doing right now, as far as exploring certain types of herbs and everything. So that way I can, for lack of better terms, normalize the use of herbs and just the word herbalism. Just so I'm really grateful for this presentation, and I just want to thank you for an excellent presentation. And that's it.
Hi. Oh, go ahead. Please go, Ebony.
If I may, I want to chime in to piggyback off of what the two ladies mentioned about being a Black herbalist and, not having the image of a Black person come to your mind when you think of who an herbalist is. I think part of the problem, at least in my experience, is the way that America has chosen to define herbalism, which is a very loose, it's like anyone can call themselves an herbalist, and then it leaves so much room for interpretation, and then it has become so whitewashed. I know that the only organization, maybe not the only, but the largest organization nationwide is the American Herbalist Guild. And I do see them making attempts to change course, but it has definitely seemed a bit more whitewashed. And so, there is no definition. There's no standard for what makes an herbalist. And the line of thinking is that if we make a standard, we will be excluding BIPOC people, we'll be telling Indigenous people that they can't call themselves an herbalist. Like the state will come in and say, you don't meet our guidelines, you don't meet our standards. As someone who's a licensed health professional, my first career was in massage therapy. I'm curious if there's other people who are people of color who agree or disagree, but I have found that the lack of standards in the herbalism industry not only hurts herbalists, but also students who want to become herbalists, because there's no standard of like education. What are you to learn? And I think if BIPOC plant practitioners took ownership and were more forthcoming with what do we see as what we want the standards to be, what could we imagine, I think there would be some growth in that recognition. So I'm just like to put that idea out there. I keep getting people who say, oh, well, if we have standards, then people like you won't be recognized. But I'm like, there's a lack of recognition to begin with. So I don't see much of a change being made. So that was all. Thank you.
I would like to say, like, I understand the rationale behind having the standard for practice for herbalism, so that way we're working with informed, we have more knowledge, like more of a knowledge base in order to deliver the best care that we can. But then again, like you said in your first point, having a standard does separate some people from having access to certain things. So it's like kind of like a slippery slope, but then it's also like it's needed, but it's also a slippery slope. So I don't know, how will we be able to like have both? Like, is it possible to have both and provide opportunities for BIPOC people and people who may not have the opportunities afforded to them to like gain access to learning more about herbs? Do we like have more like free programs and things like that to teach other people how to, like, how will we be able to do that? Because also as a healthcare practitioner myself, I know how having certain requirements, having certain licenses ensures that you have you operate based on certain standards, and that helps with like in medicine. But then herbalism is a little slightly different, so it's like how do we combine the two? It's kind of hard,
No, I think that, oh, go ahead, Sasha, sorry.
Okay. No, I was just going to add that also the beauty of herbalism is just that we are in a sense giving the medicine back to the people. Like as a herbalist, like I like the thought of being able to teach others how they can use this medicine at home. It's not something that they have to do to like go to a pharmacy to get it. The whole point is like, this is something that was originally kind of taken out of our culture, and we're just really just giving it back to people to be able to use it on their own in their home. So I feel like it's more so on the consumer to really do their research. That's why, herbalists or people who want to call themselves herbalists are really here to encourage people to educate themselves on like, what are dosages I should be looking out for? What is herbalism safety, or, what I should and shouldn't be doing with herbs, or what amounts I should be taking, which herbs I might want to stay away from, or, that type of thing. But to actually regulate it to a point where people have to actually get a certain certification or anything like that, it's really up in the air, and it kind of will essentially, I guess, put us back more steps than putting us forward. So to actually classify it as a certain thing kind of takes the beauty out of it, I feel like. And that's from somebody, I have a master's in herbalism, but I would never feel as though that's necessary for somebody to have to actually, have to call themselves herbalists or to practice herbalism in their own home. So.
I just want to lift up two comments that were made in the chat, and then Bonnie Lee, I want to let you say something. So Calix says, I'm white, but I agree we need improved standards for herbalists, but also agree that there's a risk of not acknowledging different types of knowledge like folk tradition, and we need to fix the issues of education, accessibility for folks to achieve a higher standard of knowledge. And then D. Robin says that, there was a deliberate dismantling of formal herbalist practices for BIPOC plus dismantling of herbal colleges and universities in the 1900s to reinforce allopathic modern medicine that we have today. There's also a regional aspect of this, and that, you know, we have the AHG determination, but it only goes so far, and that in other countries, herbalists have more standardization and esteem respect. And I'd be interested if knowing in those countries if the population is also more homogenous, because I think that plays a role hugely. Bonnie Lee, do you want to?
Yes, thank you so much for this event. It's just been really impactful. I have a unique question. So I guess, how do you find ways to reconnect to a part of your identity? So for example, I am a Black Latina, and I was raised by my maternal side. And while I remember my paternal grandmother and being there in a lot of the herbs and rituals and practices that she shared with me when I was younger, some of these things have been forgotten. So I'm trying to figure out how I reconnect to my culture when it comes to, and my identity when it comes to my Haitian grandmother and all of the things that are missing and things that I remember. And then I can't connect those pieces because as you get older and trauma and things happen, you forget these things. So I have bits and pieces of it. I have certain rituals that she passed down. I have certain practices and some herbs, but I guess my question is, how do I reconnect to this really this important piece of me that's missing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think one, just like what I've been doing too is like getting on Instagram and like searching various hashtags to find like other Black or other herbalists of color who are like doing this work, so that you can build up a community, because I think it can just feel really isolating and like you don't know where to start. You're shooting in the dark. But a lot of, like, more recently too, especially Black herbalists are speaking about like, these are the ways in which like I'm reclaiming and this is how I've done this work. And I think that could be one way for you to do that. And then, as I mentioned before, you know, having conversations, but there are also, it's like tedious and not probably as like appealing, but there are like historical documents that do exist that are accessible, and you can find out about a lot of different things that way. And while it may not be like specific to your community, right? Like if you're searching for Afro-Latina or, you know, Haitian traditions or practices, like you can start to begin to like learn from those resources, and then, you know, maybe talk to your family members and see if anything there resonates with them to help them remember, is one potential way. I don't know if other folks want to add like how she might be doing that work too.
Thank you. That was actually really helpful. I never thought about the historical documents and then like the hashtags. It was something that's so obvious and I just didn't even think. So I really, really appreciate that so much.
Yeah, because like when I mentioned the hog hoof tea and the like making the Black Texan connection, you know, I don't know, even not that long ago, I learned that my great grandparents, they were in Texas first before they went to Reno, right? Reno, Nevada. And then what came up for me was only like 2 resources, but one was an obituary of a Black woman who was actually in Alabama. And then there was a Facebook group of Black Texans who celebrate Black Texan history. And it's on that post where people were talking about hog hoof tea. So that's how I learned about it. And I'm like, that may have been significant to the region that they were in. And it's sort of that like scruffy research that I think we're gonna have to do, because like we all have these experiences, but we got to be talking to each other. And I think it's also funny sometimes on social media where you'll say like Black people can relate, or people of color, you know, they can relate to each other, whether they're all the way in California or they're all the way down in Florida, right? Because there is something unique about our experiences and what was preserved. And so I think there's power in that when we can't like learn about our families specifically, like we have like kinfolk and other folk who can like help us remember.
Yeah, I'll also say that if you have family members that you can ask, asking more than once is a really important, like I have family members who are, you know, I get a different, like I'll ask the same question and I will get a different response every time. And it helps to kind of piece together the story, because I deal with the same thing. Like I don't necessarily have like a full spectrum of what my lineage looks like. So just continue to ask and you'll probably get different answers that you're looking for.
Thank you. I appreciate that. You know, it's sort of like an extension of our family that becomes our family. And only recently I learned of that we had Indigenous, and it was because I see it in my maternal grandmother, like as she's older now. It's like you can see it, like her hair and everything. And you know, there's a picture somewhere in our family, but you know, again, bits and pieces. And there's all these things about my identity that I'm, like, as you said, I get a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit, because in our culture, you know, we don't talk about things. We sweep things under the rug. So I'm piecing all of these things together, and it's hard, but it's also really incredible to be able to connect with people and build an extension of my family.
Can I also add, Bonnie Lee, this is Kayla. I think someone also said, you know, learn from the plants. Someone said that in the comments, and the plants help us remember too. And that I was thinking about my own journey and how I'm just in this present moment, like being grounded in yourself as well and following your own intuition, right? Of like, what's calling you, you know, like what plants or just follow your own curiosities. Because while what I'm finding there is that when I follow my own curiosities and what's speaking to me, whether it's a plant ally that's coming or just I have my own questions, what I'm finding is that it feels like I'm also learning more about, yes, myself in this particular time, but also I can link it back. It feels as though when I start asking questions or doing research, everything that people lifted up, it feels ancestral to me. Like I do feel like there's that spiritual lineage that's happening. And then there's also this present moment that I'm coming to myself, like I'm stepping into in this moment in time that's also going to create lineage for the future generations, right? So I will also say, like, just ground yourself in your own intuition and the medicine that you're creating in this moment for yourself, because that also will be the medicine for, you know, who comes after you. And so, yeah.
Thank you, Kayla. That really resonated with me deeply. I appreciate that.
I see, I don't want to mispronounce your name, Nathalie.
It's Natalie's fine. The H is kind of silent, but thank you. First, I just want to say thank you for this, you know, talk and this conversation, the information that you shared, but also, like, you know, I think one of the most important things about this, you know, wisdom that you're sharing and is the dialogue that happens afterwards. It really is about the connections and the relationship building. And, you know, one of the, you know, that somebody mentioned in the comments that the plants themselves are the teachers, and they can, you know, when we start to dive into deeper relationship with the plants themselves, they start to share all the wisdom that we need to know. And, you know, in regards to, we have to kind of, you know, earlier the conversation about making sure that there's certain standards and regulations and that sort of thing. I'm kind of, not that I'm opposed to it, but that I think that falls under a very kind of colonial kind of structure of thinking, of being able to standardize something or standardize wisdom that comes directly from our lineages or comes directly from the plants themselves. Not to say that it's not important to have standards and to, you know, but I believe it's more important to actually build relationship with the people, with the plants, with the land, and understanding that this is a bigger conversation that is going to continue rippling out when we start to talk about standards or, you know, regulations. What are, you know, the impacts of those standards and regulations? How does that impact when we start to introduce those kinds of frameworks into our ways of learning? what are the impacts that it has on the actual people that we're, that if we're trying to create a community or trying to create, schools of thought of learning about herbs and learning about plants, what are those frameworks going to start to create in those communities, and being able to learn how to balance that and understanding that those colonial ways of kind of formulating, what's right or what's ethical or it can't be a universal kind of thing that just gets imposed on a group of people, or even our understanding of plants in general. It depends on where we are in the world, depends on the connection to the lands that we're on, depends on the people and the lineage from where we come from, also from the descendants of the lands that we stand on. So there's so many interconnected weaving of conversations that need to come from this conversation, which is what I appreciate the most about this, is just like everybody inputting their own wisdoms. So just thank you so much for this. I really, really appreciate you sharing this. So, thank you.
Ebony, did you have something?
Yeah, I just conversation, and thank you for the presentation, and also everyone who's I've been reading your comments. I wanted to follow up with like why I brought it up in the first place, and part of it is that I got into decolonizing herbalism last summer, and what really brought me to the subject was an experience I had where I had two white herbalists essentially prevent me from what I would describe as like serving my community at the height of the protests. And it was in their justification, it was I did not qualify, did not meet their standards. So I thought that was interesting because when I do hear this argument of that standardization is a form of colonialization, I don't know if I would personally agree with that, just because I've operated in a space of a holistic practice that has standards and ethics and like just guidelines, and it hasn't been a negative. It hasn't prevented me from being, from serving my community, from operating. And in fact, if anything, it gave me a foundation and like a career that led me to herbalism. And so I wanted to get the conversation started because it, like, the lack of standardization, and maybe we shouldn't call it standardization if that's like off-putting to some people, but without standards, or just in the current framework, there already is racism within the current framework of no standards as well. So I wanted to bring to light, just start a discussion on what we can do, taking ownership of what a new system could look like, and whether that's recognizing Indigenous practices for what they are, and not creating, like, it doesn't have to be like you need to pay a fee to practice, but just having some, and so that someone is becoming an herbalist would like to practice. I also think a lot of it is like imposter syndrome, people who feel comfortable calling themselves herbalists because there's no framework. It's like, someone who is a person of color who doesn't see themselves represented in their community or in this field might not feel comfortable calling themselves that. So it was just food for thought and just something I wanted to throw out there. Thanks.
I definitely appreciate you introducing that to the conversation, and it's something that I think about. And I think, there are like Black herbalists and other herbalists of color who are like creating space for folks to like access herbal knowledge. And Fox Haven, I just want to highlight Fox Haven as well. I was able to participate in the herbal CSA through like a scholarship, right? And that has like really opened me up to so much more than what I had access to before. And so I think that as we sort of reconcile with what like standardizing, or maybe not standardizing, right? Like just like putting some parameters, right, around things, I think we can sort of look to like the like community oriented herbalist spaces to like share information in a more accessible way that doesn't like require you to pay like $3,000 to take a clinical herbalist class.
Right.
Because I'm not paying that. I think, Alex, do we have time for one more question?
Sure.
Okay.
Go ahead, Ezzy.
Oh, okay, so thanks. So my question is for Sasha. You mentioned you have more of a formal education in herbalism. So during your the study, did they use like, I guess in Western medicine, they use evidence-based research. How was that able to be achieved when we're talking about herbalism, and you know how certain things don't work for everyone? Like how do they get that information through?
When you're referring to like actually like formulating for different people, depending on like, mainly we talked about treating the person as a whole, as opposed to treating the actual like symptom that they're presenting. So pretty much like whatever could be like the underlying issue causing what's affecting them. So like if they are having back pain and maybe it's due to a kidney, it might be something completely different to someone who may be having a superficial back pain. And, you know, it's just all encompassed to the individual. So we learn to actually just diagnose it, you know, to what the actual person needs, as opposed to just saying, okay, so this is what you're presenting, this is what I'll treat. We have to go a step deeper than that and also consider energetics in it as well. So energetics was a really big thing that we focused on too. So
Great, thank you.
of course.
Well, I just wanted to thank everyone for having this conversation. I know that there's not a perfect answer for a lot of these. So just having your presence and being willing to talk it through and build this community is very powerful. So I thank you all for being here. We'll be sending out the recording and some resources. But let me know if you would like. I can also create like some kind of form if people want to stay connected with each other, where you can, you know, have a list of folks who want that. So, yeah, I hope you all have a great rest of your evening, and take care.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.